To our next guest, joining us now from Capitol Hill, Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Good to have you on the show this morning.
Good to see you this morning. Good morning.
Hey, Senator. So what's your reaction to the president's selection of Brett Kavanaugh?
I think it's a positive reaction from me. Let's go through the process. Let's actually do the rest of the background work. What y'all are doing this morning, everyone around the country is going to do for about 2 months. All of us in the Senate are going to go through the process of evaluating every opinion he's written, everything he's gone through. Let's try to figure out who he is, because it's a serious decision. So let's walk through the process.
Any immediate concerns come to mind from anything you've read, anything you've seen?
No, not any immediate concerns. What I'm really looking forward to is 2 months of talking about the role of the Constitution and the role of the court. Is the court all about having another legislature that can kind of pick what the law, what they want it to say, or are they really a group that's bound by the law and bound by the Constitution to be able to determine here's what it actually says, and if we're going to change it, let's go through the legislative process to be able to do that. So that's a key aspect of that national conversation we're going to have. We're going to have some folks that have a preference that they wish the law said something and they want a judge to be able to say what they wish it said. But then we're going to have others that are going to say, let's just focus on what the law actually says.
Willie.
Senator Lankford, Willie Geist here. I want to turn the subject to the NATO summit. The president is traveling there as we speak. As he got aboard Air Force One, he tweeted a couple of things. His most recent is, quote, NATO countries must pay more. The United States must pay less. Very unfair. It's a theme and a point he's made over and over again. Do you have concerns about the president of the United States taking this approach and being confrontational with our allies as he enters the summit?
Well, I'm not concerned about that initially, quite frankly, because we've seen NATO allies also step up and say he's right. We haven't paid enough. NATO has kicked in quite a bit more just in the last year and a half than what they have done historically for a long time. But realize this is not a new issue. Eisenhower made statements about NATO. Kennedy made statements about NATO. Nixon made statements about NATO. There's a long historic process of the United States pushing on NATO allies to say you've got to step up and actually meet your commitments. So we'll continue to be able to see that.
You would agree, Senator, that the relationship between the United States and some of our Western allies, Germany, France, the UK, has been strained under President Trump, would you not?
Oh, absolutely, I would. I mean, he's pushing them in a way they don't particularly like, and he's pushing them on a financial area of an area they've not done for decades, be able to step up and meet their financial obligations for NATO. So if they step up and meet their financial obligations, that's good, but I'd also like to keep close allies and relationships as well at the end of the day.
You're talking about tariffs when you say you're concerned?
Well, that tariffs is a whole different issue on it. Quite frankly, them meeting their NATO obligations for the international defense and what we're doing in NATO is exceptionally important. But I'd also like to be able to see us be able to solve the tariff issues. One of the prime issues that folks in Oklahoma talked to me about last week when I was traveling around the state is that people in our agriculture are exceptionally concerned about tariffs and the direction that we're going dealing with tariffs, because they want to make sure that we stay open to trade. If you've got wheat or pork or beef, that's a big deal.
Senator, are they being hurt by the tariffs, are you hearing?
There's quite a bit of uncertainty for them. They don't know where the next market is. They're literally putting seed in the ground right now that they don't know if they're going to be able to ship out. And there are individuals that are losing money right now on it because they're being undercut. And if our allies, whether it be Mexico or Canada or in Europe or in Asia, if they go find other markets, those are very difficult to be able to win back.
Can I ask you really quickly to follow up on the NATO question? Attached to that, obviously, is the president's relationship with Vladimir Putin. Are you uncomfortable with him talking to Vladimir Putin alone without any American representatives? Are you uncomfortable by his relationship with Vladimir Putin in any way?
I don't know what his relationship is. I know they've talked on the phone several times and such, that I don't know how much of a relationship that really is. I'm not uncomfortable with the president speaking to any world leader, and that's true of whether it's President Obama, President Bush, or President Trump. That is his role, to be able to interact with foreign policy and foreign leaders. He has a exceptionally different style, and that's probably the understatement of the day. Meeting with Kim Jong-un face-to-face was very antithetical to what everyone's done in the past, but hopefully it's a breakthrough moment that we'll see. Time will tell on where they will go with North Korea. We'll have to deal with the same issues. Russia is what Russia is. Putin is what Putin is. You've got to be able to confront him. You've got to be able to deal with this. So you got to be able to talk to him, but we should actually be strong in those conversations. They did mess with our elections in 2016. They are not our friend in world powers. They are trying to undercut Western influence and United States influence worldwide, and we need to pay attention to that.
Senator, another topic. You're in the Homeland Security Committee. If you were to call Homeland Security today and demand a list of children who have been separated from their parents, indicating where they are in this country and where the parents are. Could you get a definitive list today?
I could not, but that wouldn't be a list that we would ever give out. We never give out a list of where foster children are located, whether it's a state or as a federal government. We don't give a list like that. Now, can they provide a list of where all those are? Do they have it? Yes, they do. I've spoken as recently as last Friday.
Have you seen it?
With
Have you
Homeland
seen
Security.
such a list?
I have not seen it, nor have I asked for that list, because quite frankly, I don't need to have a list of where every child is located. I need to know, do they know where every child is located? One of the difficulties they have right now is some of the parents and the adults that brought these children across the border are now saying those are not my kids and walking away from it. So those kids will be placed in foster care of someone here in the United States. The parents are deported, and the parents, I assume, will then try to come make a second trip without their children to try to cross the border illegally to be able to catch up with them later. This is more complicated than it looks. They've got a couple of parents even that they've done background checks on and had criminal convictions, whether it be rape, child abuse, and other things, and they're trying to figure out, do we put that adult back with that child, knowing that if this was an American, we would not do that.
Right.
So this is a tough situation.
Definitely a tough situation, but it does not appear that there was a plan in place to reunite these kids and document them and process them in a way. I mean, we're hearing reports, Senator, with all due respect, that there are children under 5 up to 50 who they cannot find the parents and they are not able to reunite them. You said on the 24th on MSNBC, we know where every single child is, and that these are career people at HHS and DHS, and that it will be absolutely possible to connect them with their parents or the relative they came with. Can you really say that? If you don't know, you can't.
I can. I still feel very confident about that because, again, these are not political appointees, and I've had a little bit of a pushback in the sense that these are individuals that there was no plan to ever reunite them.
That's right.
The HHS's responsibility is not reuniting. It's taking care of those children and then to be able to know where they are. The challenge that we've had with unaccompanied minors, if you go back to 2014 when we had thousands of unaccompanied minors come, they were placed in the care of a relative here in the United States. Then that relative, often they were also illegally present in the United States. They would then leave and not show up for court date. That's created this grand challenge from DHS.
Under President Trump's policy, there was no plan to reunite these kids with their families.
I don't take it that way, and I don't mean to be unkind in it, Mika, but the HHS's role is to provide them care, to be able to know where they are, and then the DHS process is actually walking through the prosecutions for these adults to be able to figure out if they qualify for asylum. If so, they're reunited, or if not, they're deported, and then we reconnect the children at that point. So the challenge of they were never planning to reconnect. This was not the United States taking children away and saying we're going to put them in foster care, and because you crossed our border, we're not going to allow you to have your children back. It's two different agencies. HHS has one responsibility, DHS has another,
right,
but they always track where each one is.
Neither has a plan to reunite them. Neither of them.
They are reuniting them.
They're trying to. We do understand they're trying to, but there isn't a specific plan to reunite them, and there are some that are in question now because they have been separated, and there's a question as to whether they will ever be reunited because there is no plan to reunite them.
No, I just disagree with the statement there is no plan. This is not the United States taking children away with no plan to ever give them back to their parents. The challenge is some of those individuals are not their parents. Some of those individuals are traffickers claiming to be their parents. So they're doing DNA tests to be able to evaluate, are these really relatives that we're working through? If they're not a relative, then we're not going to go back and place them with someone who's not a relative. We've got to be able to figure out what to do with them. Some of the adults are saying, we don't want to take these children. We want to be deported, and we'll start all over again and come back. This time it'll be easier to not have to travel a month long through Mexico with a child. We'll just try to catch up with them later. So it's a very complicated situation to try to be able to work through reconnecting. There are 102 of those individuals that are 4 years old and younger. They've already reconnected half of them. The other half, they're still trying to be able to determine, is this a relative? Is this the right person to be able to place them with? And will the adult even take them if we do?
All right, Senator James Lankford, as always, thank you for coming on the show to talk about Judge Kavanaugh. That was actually, at the end of the day, the easy part. So,
yeah, I wish any of this was easy. It's all complicated stuff, but I think we should do it the right way.
It is all very, very complicated. And we thank you so much for being with us, as always. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.